In this screencast, we're going to help you get started with the Construct API. We will be walking through making your first API request. So to get started, we're going to head over to the Accela developer portal. If you've not yet had a chance to register, the URL is developer.accela.com. You can sign up very quickly for a new account. I'll go ahead and get signed in so we can take a look around. On this portal, you'll find many resources. You'll find a link to our developer blog. Resources here are links to our API documentation. Your profile is your user profile. The support link will give you an email out to developers@accela.com to help you with anything you might run into. And this tools link will link out to the Accela GitHub site. So to get started, first thing I have to do is register an app. You'll notice here that I've got several apps registered, but we'll walk through registering a new one for this exercise. Um, Here, I'm going to be asked for a little bit of information about the app that I want to register. So, targeted users, I choose between agency and citizen app. An agency app is intended for government employees using Excel automation that have a login already to Excel automation. So these are things like productivity apps, inspector apps, things of that nature. Citizen apps are exactly what it sounds like. These are intended for the public to engage with their governments. So for our example, we'll start with an agency app. We'll give our app an app name. So I'm just giving it a name, my first API call, and a brief description. Under stage, there's under development and published. You'll leave that under development until you're ready to launch your app. We'll talk about your app secret here in a minute, and that's basically all we have to do to get started. So I'll go ahead and hit submit. And here we see my first API call here at the top of the list. You'll notice that it was assigned an app ID and an app secret, and we'll need those here in a minute when we make our API call. These will help tell our request which app is making that call. So we're all set from that perspective. Next step, let's take a look at the API documentation. Now, the API documentation is organized by the different objects that are available within the Accela system. For our example today, we're going to be using a records request, and we're going to be calling get all records. So here we are. With the get all records, we have to take a look at the authorization type. Now, authorization type tells us what do we have to pass as headers as a part of our request. And if I look at some of the other documentation here under the introduction and using the Construct API, we see a list of both authentication and headers. So authentication tells us what details we need to pass depending on the authentication type. And then headers are the various types of headers that I might add. So content type and accept are pretty standard headers that you'll see all over the place. Authorization is an access token that I would receive from a successful authentication. The app ID, if we look back at our registered app, we see app ID and app secret. We can pass the app ID and app secret in for particular types of authentication, as well as environment and agency. Okay, so let's go back and take a look. In our example, we're going to be using this get all records. And get all records basically gives me back a list of records within the Excel automation system. And within Excel automation, a record is basically a representation of the various types of entities that are represented. So a permit, a license, a complaint, a service request, a work order, things of that nature. So it tells us our authorization type is no authorization required, which basically means that I don't need an access token, but I do need to tell it the name of the agency, the environment, and my app ID to be able to send my request. Even though it says no authorization required, I can still also use an authorization token. And the nice thing about an authorization token is that it tells it the environment, it tells it the name of the agency, all by within that token. So Uh, Typically in an app, I've implemented an OAuth 2 process where I can go register using Civic ID, either as a citizen or an agency user. Since this is our first API request, we'll just assume that we haven't implemented our authentication within our app yet. So the great thing is the developer portal offers a nice utility to get a test API token. So to do so, first thing we have to do is come in here and under client, we select the app that we just registered. The test environment is hard-coded as test. The developer portal offers a sandbox environment for developers to use, and that environment is registered as a test environment. So we'll leave that alone as test. The name of the agency is Islandton, and then the scope. What the scope is a space-separated list of API requests that I plan on making. So for our example, we'll come back to our documentation and I'll look under get all records and I'll see that the scope is get underscore records. So I'm going to grab that and I'm going to paste that in here and I'm going to go ahead and submit. Now at this point, it's going to ask me to log in. And since I registered my app as an agency app, I'm going to see the login screen for an agency user. The user is going to specify the agency they're logging into, username, and a password. And again, since the previous screen marked it as the test environment, it's defaulted to the test environment, and I can sign in. Now I'm going to see a quick screen that says, do you want to allow this user access to your app? And you're going to go ahead and click allow. And the result of clicking the allow button will just take us to a screen that has a text box like this with a long string of letters, numbers, and symbols. And this long string is our test API token that we can use to make requests. So I suggest when you're testing this out that you either copy this to your clipboard, copy it to a separate document, or just leave this tab open because we'll need this when we're getting ready to make our API request. So to do our first API request, we're going to use a really nice and useful tool called Postman. As you might notice, I'm using Google Chrome, and I can go to the Chrome store, type in Postman, and you will find an app there that's called Postman REST Client. Go ahead and install that, and you can use that to make sample API requests, which is really useful. Now, as we make an API request, we got to fill in a couple pieces of information on this form here. First is we need to put in the API endpoint. So we're going to type in apis.accela.com. And this is the API endpoint for any API request, no matter what agency that you're working with that uses Excel automation. Next, we got to go check out what the URI is for our particular request. And down here, we'll notice that the URI is v4 records. We'll grab that, put that back in Postman. And from there, if I just put this in as such, what will happen is I will actually end up requesting all records in the system. So we'll start with that and we'll move forward. Down here, I've already opened up the headers section by clicking this headers button. That'll open up the headers, put in my contact type or my content type and accept of application JSON. So we're just specifying what format we'll request in and what format we'll accept. Again, even though this particular call does not require authorization, we went through the process of getting an authorization token, so we can use that particular token to indicate what agency and what environment we want to make that request. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this header called authorization and put in my API test token. That right here. And then we're also going to put in Accela app ID. So I'm going to grab my app ID over here. Put that right here. And then let's go ahead and hit send. And we got some results back. So we'll take a look down here. So here we see here is return JSON. This JSON contains an array called result. which is basically an array of records that are returned. And so down here we can see what type of record it is. Can see a description of the record. We can see the date that it was statused and some basic details. So we see some of these are graffiti service requests. So somebody's been reporting graffiti in their neighborhood somewhere. You see more and more and more. Now, you might have been worried that I was going to pull all the records out with the system because I didn't provide any filters. But the nice thing is by default, there's a limit of it only pulling back 25 records. And then this little attribute down here called has more lets me know if there's more that I can request. And then I can send back another request using the offset and the limit features to pull back more. So I would say if I wanted to send another request to get more, I would say the offset is 25, limit's 25, and that would give me the next 25 that are available. Let's go back and take a look at the documentation again here quickly. And we'll notice that there's all these request parameters that I could potentially use. And these request parameters are detailed down in this table here, but they essentially allow me to filter the data that I would get back. So let's give that a try. So let's try adding open date from, open date to. So what I'll do is I'll put a question mark at the end here, drop in the parameters, and then I'll change this. And let's just take a look at anything that's been opened this month. Looks like there's actually been several opened up this month. Now I can keep adding on additional parameters to add to my search filter. So I can say, let's say, I see a lot of service requests here, but let's take a look at what's in the building module. There we go, and we have a couple of building permits out here. And we see plan review, submitted, status. I'm looking at the status here. Plan review. Okay, well let's say that we only want to take a look at those that have been submitted. So I'm going to add status equals submitted and hit send again. And now we'll notice I'm only getting back records that are in the status of submitted. And that's it. In these couple of simple steps, you're able to very quickly get to calling your first Construct API request. All I had to do was register within the developer portal, register an app, which assigned me an app ID and an app secret, take a look at the documentation for the API that I wanted to make a request for, get a test API token by specifying the scope that I want to request, and that scope being the API that I want to call. And then I leverage Postman to put in my API endpoint, add in the URI for the API, add any other request parameters, make sure my authorization or my headers are set correctly, hit send, and then instantly I start getting data back right away. Feel free to explore, and if you run into any questions, feel free to reach out to us at developers@accela.com. Thank you.